This week, after 15 years, we're finally getting a new Indiana Jones film. Since some of these are some of my favorite movies of all time, it's time to finally stop and share all of my thoughts on the Indiana Jones movies, the ones that I love and the ones that have ripped out my heart. Today we are talking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comments section. Share your thoughts on Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. This is a spoiler-free review, so feel free to spoil away down below in the comment section. No need for spoiler warnings, and if you haven't watched the movie yet, go watch it and come back and join the discussion over here. As I mentioned before, I'm trying to review all of the Indiana Jones movies. I've already done Raiders of the Lost Ark, so I'll put a link to the playlist right up here with that review. And I also did a video way back at the very beginning of my channel where I did a how to fix Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls. I mean, this video is almost 7 years old. It's very early in the channel, but I think I had some good thoughts in there. If you want to see something different from my channel, as well as seeing the early days of my channel, go check that one out, and let's get started with the good. And to set the tone of this review right out of the gate, while I don't think Temple of Doom is perfection like Raiders of the Lost Ark or a perfect follow-up like Last Crusade, I think there are some problems with this film, I do think it is a great follow-up that is a nice companion to Raiders of the Lost Ark that has its own identity, its own feel. And a big part of that is that of all the Indiana Jones films, I think this is the one that just feels the most like a roller coaster ride. You just stop and think about how this movie kicks off. Right out of the gate, you have a dance number, followed by a shootout, followed by a car chase, followed by a plane crash, followed by out-of-control sledding down a mountain in a life preserve or life raft that ends up in a river. This is just the first 20 minutes of the movie. Like, it kicks off in high gear, and then likewise, it ends with this slam-bang 30-minute finale with, once again, big, massive scale fights, escaping human sacrifice. You've got children rebelling, or child slaves rebelling against the people enslaving them. You have the minecart chase. You have the bridge. You have water flying around everywhere. And it's just filled with these slam bang, fast paced action sequences. So it just moves like a roller coaster in ways that the other ones don't. I mean, of the movies that have been released thus far, the other three end without kind of the big slam bang action finale. I mean, Raiders, the final action sequence is 30 minutes from the end of the film. Same with Last Crusade, where both of those movies kind of end in a temple or with a ceremony going on. And then kind of along those same lines, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, you're running around through ruins and stuff for the last 20 minutes of the movie before our interdimensional beings, or as normal people call them, aliens, show up. This movie ends just with this long, diverse action sequence that's thrilling, iconic, and memorable. And for that reason, in certain ways, I find this to be maybe the most digestible of the Indiana Jones films, because it is just so action-packed that you can just kind of put it on and have all of that taking place. And maybe that's not as satisfying on an emotional level as Raiders or Last Crusade, that kind of have more character moments going on, a little bit more character arc taking place with the finales of those films and the ideas that are kind of going on there. But it just delivers this thrilling excitement. And even to that point, part of where this movie came about is they took several leftover action sequences from Raiders. They brainstormed all these ideas for Raiders, and they realized they had too many. And then they crafted this movie around the idea, like the minecart chase was supposed to be in Raiders, and same with the intro to the film. And they just took those and they went, these are awesome sequences. Let's find a way to really pay those off. Along these same lines, it provides all the thrills, the adventure that you got in Raiders without really feeling like a rehash. It's a very different type of adventure with an indie at a very different starting point. where you have the cold open in Raiders of him kind of off on an adventure, but then he's a professor that's recruited to go on this mission by the government, which is very similar to kind of what goes down in Last Crusade in a different way, but similar also in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. In this movie, he's just off on the adventure the whole time. He's off trying to get these relics, and in his escape, he ends up stumbling his way into his next adventure that he's not looking for. But there's no Professor Jones with his students in this movie. And so it just has a different vibe, a different flavor to it. And I really enjoy that about this movie, that it just kind of stands out as the fast-paced, action-based roller coaster Indiana Jones movie. And another nice detail in some of this is that I watched a video, I believe it was on Joe Blow, about the secret character arc in the original Indiana Jones trilogy, where with the release order of the films, it's not entirely obvious kind of what's going on here, because Temple of Doom is a prequel to Raiders, and then Last Crusade starts off with the cold open with him as a child. And this video from, I believe it was Joe Blow. When I'm editing this, I'll try and cut it in here. But it kind of like maps out, if you actually watch all of this in chronological order, the way that young Indy has this idea of, these relics belong in a museum. It's not about fortune and glory. And then this guy that is kind of a Tomb Raider stealing artifacts for rich guy that we don't know too much about him, that Indiana Jones steals his look from this guy, and the guy gives him the hat and everything, and you see him, and you can see the inspiration coming from that. And then in the films, chronologically, the next thing we see is him in Temple of Doom, and the vibe we're hearing from people is that he's a grave robber. He's on this adventure where he's using a child to go on this very different dangerous shootout, and his goal is not preservation of culture. His goal in the movie at the beginning is not to rescue the kids. His goal in all of it is very much the fact that he wants fortune and glory. And it's not until like middle of the film where he realizes, like when he sees children being enslaved, realize I can't just ignore that. And he shifts and he has this transition to being a better person in the film. All that to say, he's very much a scoundrel in this movie at the beginning. He's not a heroic character, and that's what makes him interesting. He's not overtly evil. He's not lacking in concern for other people, but that's not his motivator. And as you kind of go throughout this movie, you see him start to transition and start to like care more about implications and consequences of everything going down. And then you get into Raiders, and he's recruited for the sake of the government wanting to track down one of the just classic lost artifacts of all of human history, the Ark of the Covenant. And, by the end of it, he's the person that has the wisdom to say that, like, no, I don't need to have all knowledge. This is dangerous. This is not something we're meant to dabble in. You see that change. And by the time you get to Last Crusade, he's motivated to go save his father. And he has moments where he's tempted to just indulge in the cup itself for eternal life. But the journey there is much more about his father stopping the Nazis, and there's a heroic journey there. And so if you watch all of this in chronological order, you start to see a much more of this arc from Indiana Jones inspired by a grave robber that gave him a hat and had a cool jacket look, to becoming someone that much more so is motivated by nobility and heroism. Not fully. And then even when you get to Kingdom of Crystal Skulls, you learn, they just like subtly mention what he did during World War II. And it's like he's this war hero. And by the time, according to the chronology of everything, Indiana Jones was born in 1999. So by the time World War II breaks out, he's in his 40s. So that means he chose to enlist to go into the war and fight Nazis because it was the right thing to do. Of course, he'd seen their evil. He'd seen this through the adventures and the films here. But he turns into someone that's a legitimate war hero pushing back the Nazis. And you see an arc there. But in this movie, is really where the transition happens from a guy, like at the beginning, he's not a good guy, like at all. If you pay attention to it and don't have borrowed trust of Indiana Jones, yeah, he's the hero, and just stop and think about what's actually going on, what his actual reputation is during that discussion at the beginning of the film. He's a shady guy. And that's what makes him interesting. There's no, like, they didn't feel the need to present Indiana Jones as actually a hero. We kind of imply that because he's our protagonist and he changes and does good things. But there's a lot to him that is not entirely the best. Oh, actually, I mentioned just the beginning scene, but also when they get into the monkey brain eating scene, all throughout the film, there's these implications that he's not a great guy. People all over the world know him as this American archaeologist stealing things, robbing graves, and it's not nobility driving all of this.
I seem to remember that in Honduras you were accused of being a grave robber rather than an archaeologist.
And he changes throughout the films, and that's like, it's a little bit lost, it's a little bit hidden. It's not entirely obvious, but it's also one of the things that's so clearly there and that makes him interesting and compelling. Flawed protagonists, flawed, eventually heroes, people that aren't motivated by the best things. And through the experiences they have, they become a better person and do the right thing because of all of that. Other thing about this movie that just makes it pop and stand out is this movie goes hard. Like, this is a movie that was so intense that they invented the PG-13 rating because of it. Back when I was still in youth group at my church, we'd do these beach trips every summer, and we ride on a gigantic charter bus, and we'd have VHS tapes, we'd watch movies. And so they brought a stack of movies, and one year we're watching on church trip Temple of Doom. And everything's mostly pretty fine until they get to the human sacrifice scene. You've got all these homeschoolers on there, and this guy just smashes his hand into a guy's chest, rips out his heart, and you just hear homeschoolers all over the place like, what are we watching? What is this? Like, they selected it and didn't stop to think about what actually happens in the movie. They hadn't watched it recently enough. It just rips out someone's heart. It was pretty amazing. I loved that. Anyway, and then they, burn a guy alive. But like, it is intense if you stop to think about it. Human sacrifice, child slavery, children being beaten with whips. Like, there's crazy. And then we're eating monkey brains so hard that they had to invent a new rating because of all this. Oh, even in the dialogue of these children that are suffering, there's a clip in this movie where a child begs for death. Like, that's a thing that happens in this movie. That was a joke in Super Mario Brothers a couple months back. That's just like a serious line in this. Indiana Jones is forced to drink blood and becomes a mindless zombie that is out to like kill Short Round. Like his buddy. Like, this is intense stuff. And well, of course, this shouldn't be a PG movie. Ratings were different, but it like reminds you of an era where movies weren't designed to be totally sanitized to play to the broadest possible audience, where they actually had edge to them and intensity. I saw one of my YouTube peers, or not necessarily YouTube peers, critic peers on Twitter yesterday, and I guess he'd never seen Raiders of the Lost Ark before. And so he finally watched it and he goes, oh, this movie's a lot more graphic than I was expecting. Because you just get so used to what it's in PG-13 movies now, which is bloodless violence and big, gigantic action sequences, but without anything that like feels intense or in your face, or like trying to find a way to have really heavy subject matter, but always cushion it. So you can say, oh, yeah, I mean, we have slavery in our movie, but you don't feel the impact of it. In this movie, you see children chipping away at rocks while someone is whipping them. And then the child's like, please let me die. It goes hard. And because of that, you can actually hate the villains and want them to lose and want them to die, be eaten by crocodiles and alligators or whatever they were at the bottom of the pit or everything like that. And it makes movies feel like it has a personality, where evil is actually treated as evil and not like smooth off the edges of pure evil. This allows things to be really, really nasty and bad. Also in here, we got Short Round. And I always had fun with Short Round as like a nice sidekick. One of these characters that I haven't seen the new movie yet. I haven't heard that he's in it. I would love it if he made some appearance. If there's some cameo that they've actually kept secret or something like that. If they didn't do that, I feel like that's such a bizarre waste. You literally have an actor that was in a movie that was so well acclaimed last year when they were still making this one that you'd go like, oh, we should probably find some way to have something here. And then more so over the last 5 months, he's won an Oscar. The movie won Best Picture, and people, it's like reminded how much they love this guy. And the wildest, craziest stories in movie history of that Short Round has now won an Oscar. And he hasn't been in very many things. And Harrison Ford hasn't. That's wild. Harrison Ford is like Mount Rushmore of movie stars. And Short Round has an Oscar. And that's so cool that he has an Oscar, but it's kind of weird that Harrison Ford doesn't. But like, you want to see more. Like, what does this relationship look like when Short Round's not a kid? Like, what is it morphed into as they grown up? And I'm curious about that. I would love to see some expansion of that. But he's a fun character. And I touched on this at the beginning of this about the action sequences. But Spielberg knows how to deliver classic, edge of your seat, exciting action sequences, thrills, where the movie kicks off and Andy finds himself in over his head with all of these people there trying to kill him, narrowly escapes jumping out the window, and with this getaway driver as a kid. And then we're on a plane, and that's also piloted by or owned by the Lei Shao. And so we're going to die here too. And so we got to make a way to escape this. Like, it's thrilling stuff that just everything he does to try to escape leads to the next thing that puts him in danger. It's exciting. And I don't know that I think the finale of this movie is just as iconic as the stuff in Raiders. But I don't know that the early stuff is quite as iconic, but it's still really exciting. And then when you get to the finale, the rope bridge, just as memorable and iconic as anything in Raiders of the Lost Ark. One of those classic images of this tattered Indiana Jones, sleeves even ripped off. He's crazy and he starts chopping at the bridge. The minecart chase, iconic, legend tier, Indiana Jones stuff going on here. And then, of course, the big, gigantic human sacrifice set and fight sequence in there. Pause right there. Like, these sets are massive. Like, and when you watch something like this and you see the scope and size of these rooms that they're in and realize there's sets that they had to build, it's cool. It's not green screen. It's not cheating. Like, they're in a real place and it's huge. And you feel that while you're watching it. And a fun fact in here, during the big final fight, while they're freeing all the kids, Harrison Ford got seriously injured, which is a recurring theme of his whole career. He's gotten injured so many times, literally at this point in time, going back 40 years. He was getting serious injuries. So he hurts his back, has to basically take a month off. And so his stuntman, Vic Armstrong, goes in and films all of this stuff. And if you watch it, there's all these scenes where the camera's like right here and Indiana Jones walks forward to like face off against guys because they can't show his face. And when you know that, you kind of watching for some of it, realize how few times they show his face other than in close-ups. It's because they shot for weeks all these massive action sequences with a stuntman and then had Harrison Ford pop up to do the close-ups and make sure you can see his face. And it works really seamless if you don't know otherwise. But as soon as you realize it, it's pretty funny to watch the entire thing. So for me, this movie, I think, delivers potentially more awesome action than Raiders. Some of it's just as memorable. And I think it's a great piece of the Indiana Jones story of watching that arc and that transformation of him slowly going from grave robber that uses children as his sidekicks into someone that's much more heroic by the time you get to the end of Last Crusade and move into World War II. But I think of the original trilogy, this is the one that very obviously has the biggest faults. So let's move on to the bad. And when it comes to this movie, the big, glaring, shrieking issue that just stands out is Willie. Willie Scott is a bad character. It's not just that she's an obvious, clear downgrade from Marion Ravenwood. That's obvious that Marion is like this strong, exciting character that gets in on the action. She wants to be there. She's excited by this stuff and is curious about it, just like Indiana Jones. She has her own wits and cleverness about her. It's not just that Marion Ravenwood is a great character and Willie's not. It's not just that Marion is a proactive character and Willie is a kind of a damsel in distress. She doesn't want to be on this adventure. Willie is an irritating, whiny, obnoxious character. As she's written right out of the gate, we're in a car chase and people are like shooting at her, at Indy, at Short Round, and Indy's trying to keep them alive by holding a gun, and it like burns her hand, and she literally goes, "Oh, I cracked the nail," while she's being shot at, which she's supposed to be comic relief. She's just not funny, and it's misplaced. And so you're in an action sequence and she's behaving in a manner that's not just damsel in distress. It's like entitled and obnoxious. Like, oh, my nail's broken. We're all probably about to die, get shot in the face, crash the car, burn to death, but I cracked a nail. It's that sort of thing where you're like, what is going on here? Another time in the movie where they're on the elephant voyage, and she's like, I'm a singer, I could lose my voice. They're on this journey in the middle of nowhere, traveling, and she's like, I could lose my voice. It's just whining constantly the entire movie. And it's not like she has an arc. It's not as if when you get to the end of the film, she starts off whiny and then they give her some heroic action where she realizes that I need to go save these kids. And in a movie with child slavery, human sacrifice, there's a bunch of opportunities to have her choose to do something that's right and noble. And when you set someone up to be so obnoxious, whiny, and irritating, and they do something noble, there's a nice release to that. There's something, but it never really happens. It's just from beginning to end, she's annoying, which is kind of funny because Steven Spielberg married her a number of years after this. He cast her as this irritating character. I don't know if it's her performance, how much is her performance, how much is just the writing, but this is the most irritating character in all of Indiana Jones. And that's the person that Steven Spielberg ended up marrying. It's kind of funny when you watch the behind the scenes stuff for this on the Blu-ray and everything. They're like working on the dance numbers and you just see Spielberg and her like hanging out, working on dance things. Like, okay, yeah, that it makes sense that they got married. Like, it seems very clearly these two people really like each other. And that was like 6-7 years before they got married. And Spielberg had a whole marriage between those shots that you can see them like flirting with each other. When they got married, he had a whole other marriage in between all of that, which is, the way life works sometimes. But as a character, she's probably the worst character in the entire franchise of just like irritating, nothing of like, she doesn't bring anything to the table. And when you're going from a great love interest for Indiana Jones that like compliments him wonderfully in one movie, and then in the next movie, you have a character that you go, why would he ever be attracted to this whiny woman? And if your point is it's part of his journey where he's just a womanizer, she's pretty, she's here, so he likes her. Okay. But even that, I think you do even a little bit more than that. Just like, yeah, well, he's just a horn dog and she's there. Whatever it is, like, that's not even fleshed out in the movie. So she's just irritating. We don't like her, but for some reason, Indiana Jones kind of does. Other thing in here, it feels like it's trying too hard to do gross out gags. So the first movie had some of these sequences where we cut to dead body with spikes coming out of the face. We go through a tomb where like these ghoulish, rotten bodies pop up in front of people. And so you have a lot of those moments, and then people explode and melt at the end of the movie. So it felt like they wanted to do that again, and they wanted to copy that. But they didn't have as natural of a way to do it. So the human sacrifice stuff, you go, okay, yeah, that plays into the plot. When you're just like, we're in India, they eat weird things in India, don't they? They're eating monkey brains. They're eating eyeballs. They're eating snakes. There's a side to that immediately you go, well, that's kind of not the best way to perceive of the cuisine of an entire country when you're like, they eat weird stuff. There's obviously some racist implications to that. And it just feels like a forced gag of, what's the grossest possible things we could have them eat? Eyeball soup. When you're watching it and eyeballs pop up for the first time, it certainly gets a reaction, but it feels forced. And there's a lot of these just kind of feel forced, and in particular, the food scene, rather than just organically fitting into the narrative. I would say, if you're having human sacrifice, drinking blood, mind control, those fit. Traps with some spiders and bugs and stuff, that fits. Just forcing gross food eating, that's forcing something that doesn't need to be there. And as much as I describe this as a roller coaster ride and being action-packed at the beginning and the end, it slows in the middle a lot. So you have a movie that when you look at its total runtime, when you got a 20-minute slam bang beginning, 20-minute slam bang finale, 30-minute slam bang finale. I don't know the exact runtimes on it, but this is a high percentage of this movie is Indiana Jones in action doing thrilling and exciting stuff. And then you have a couple more fights in the middle, and you have a couple more like tense sequences in the middle. But of the like big, really exciting stuff, it's very much here, and then in the middle, it lulls a bit. So there's a bit of a pacing issue with the way that it specifically plays out. Real quick before I give you my final thoughts, remember to share your thoughts down below in the comments section. I'm hoping to be able to review also Last Crusade Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls as quick as possible, but I've run out of time before I'm going to be able to see the next movie and do ranking stuff, so I don't know exactly how this will play out, but I'll have a playlist up here as those come out. And remember, I got that How to Fix Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls video that I'm like one of the things that I wish I did more videos like that, and I did one way back at the early days of my channel. Overall, I do think this is a great follow-up to Raiders that doesn't rehash that film. It has the action and excitement. It delivers the same experience that we got in Raiders, but it doesn't rehash the plot, the flow, the nature of the story. So it really stands out in the franchise, sees Indiana Jones at a different place in his life, has a bunch of its own iconic sequences that I love, but of our original trilogy, I think it's easily the weakest. Willie Scott is a bad character. There are some pacing issues here, and I think at times it's trying to force some gross out stuff. But besides that, this is a film that I thoroughly enjoy. I put it on just as much as I put on the other two movies in the original trilogy. Well, my wife loves Last Crusade so much. That one by far is the one that we watch the most in our household. So I can't say I watch it as much as the other two because Last Crusade is the one that we absolutely watch the most. But I watch this one just as much as Raiders. And Raiders, I think, is a perfect adventure film. So I think that this is another great adventure. Overall, it's an A- on the entertainment scale. It's a 9.5. And I'd say this is another must-see film, but not quite as must-see as Raiders of the Lost Ark, which I think is a perfect film, which every cinephile must see. But if you're someone that's into blockbusters, adventure, of course you gotta watch this movie. I think it is another solid Indiana Jones adventure that delivers something a little bit different. You can check out my other reviews over there. You can check out my How to Fix Kingdom of the Crystal Skulls right down there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.